Today I'm going to show you some of the options that Leostream provides for multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication has become very important and a big topic for a lot of companies, particularly now because they're sending a lot of their employees remote. And in some cases, those employees are going to stay remote. And what you want to be able to do is say, well, if someone's logging into my on-prem resources from their home or from someplace else, you want to really ensure that the correct users are logging in. And so you want them to go through multi-factor authentication. But when those users do return to the office, well, then they're logging in from your corporate network and you're fine with them just using a single factor such as Active Directory. So I'm going to show you how you can do that in Leostream, essentially have location-based multi-factor authentication. Now, I know you're looking at an AWS window and I said I'm demoing Leostream, but I wanted to show you this because this is mimicking my remote and on-prem environment. I have an environment in AWS where the machines themselves here are locked inside of a private network. So you'll notice that they only have private IP addresses. So essentially, this VPC, this virtual private cloud in AWS, I'm considering my on-prem, my data center. If I log in from inside that private network, then I don't need to go through multi-factor authentication. Now I'm sitting at my house, so I'm remote. So when I log in from my house, then I should actually have to pass through multi-factor authentication. So the way that's mimicked in Leostream here, I'm going to first show you the administrator web interface so you can see how I set this up. Here you see the administrator web interface. Now all of your authentication servers are added in the setup section. Here, the first factor in Leostream is typically always username and password against some sort of authentication server like Active Directory, anything based on Open LDAP, or even NIS if you happen to have older Linux systems that use NIS. That's the first factor, username and password. So here I've created my Active Directory center for my demo environment. Now, you'll notice here there's also a SAML server here. This is the first place you start to see MFA in Leostream. One thing that you can do, because Leostream is a web application, is you can front end it with a SAML-based IDP. And so here in my case, I'm using Okta. I've connected Leostream to Okta and then registered a SAML application inside Okta for my Leostream connection broker. Now, the thing about our SAML support right now is it is global. Once SAML is enabled for your Leostream environment, all users are required to go through that SAML authentication. We are in our next release working on that so you can have different users require SAML and other users not require SAML. So again, users outside have to pass through Okta or whatever MFA provider. Once they're inside, they can go directly to Active Directory. So this is the first form of multi-factor authentication I talked about is SAML. And obviously in that case, SAML handles the actually which type of factors do you need to go through. In Leostream, again, we can support Active Directory username and password as a first factor. If you want to use that, then your MFA options are over here. There are essentially two different MFA options that you have when you're using username and password as the first factor. The first one is Duo. We do provide native Duo integration inside of Leostream. I don't have it set up here in my demo, but essentially what that means is you'll use username and password for the first factor, and then you'll hand the user off to Duo. And that's nice because they can enter in a PIN or token, they can get a push to their phone, however you have your Duo set up. The other thing you can do, which is what you see here, is essentially hook Leostream up to any identity provider that supports Radius. So in my case, I've installed the Radius agent for Okta. And then I've hooked Leostream up to the Radius agent, and the Radius agent talks out to Okta. So this means, as I mentioned, any identity provider. Okta, you can use Duo as Radius, you can use Ping ID, there's a number of others. As long as they have that Radius support, Leostream can use them as a second factor. The nice thing about our Radius support, unlike SAML and Duo, which right now is purely a web browser login, the Radius support works with any of our clients. So web browsers still, but also the PC over IP clients, whether those be zero or hard, and also, or zero or soft, I should say, and also our Leostream Connect clients. Those are software clients as well. So that's setting up the different MFA options, and you can have as many different MFA providers as you want. So you can actually send different groups of users through different MFA providers if you so desire. And where do you do that? How do you say, well, okay, great. which users do require MFA. Well, that's all done here in the configuration section. Now, before I show you how you say which users require MFA, I also want to talk about these locations, because we want to base it not only on who the user is, but where they're coming from. So a location in Leostream is essentially a group of client devices. And you can create these in whichever way works out best for you. Now, what I've done is I said, well, I have one location here, which is everybody who's logging in from a web browser. Inside of there, I've created a nested location, which is my on-prem. Typically, it's a little bit easier to whitelist clients than it is necessarily to restrict which ones. So here I can enable users who come in from my local network to log in just with their username and password. Because I know, and this is true for you too, you know your internal internet IP address range. And so this is the IP address range of my VPC inside of AWS. So anyone logging in from there, that's an on-prem web browser. Anyone from a different IP address, I'm going to consider as remote. You'll notice here, I also have a location for PC over IP 0 clients. I'm not going to show you any PC over IP logins. It's a little hard to demo a 0 client on a screen share. But what I do want to point out is if you are using PC over IP 0 clients, we do support multi-factor authentication using those PIV cards. So any common access card that's very common in government facilities, you can use that as a multi-factor authentication, specifically with PC over IP 0 clients. So now let's move into where all this comes together in the assignments table. The first thing I'm going to show is the multi-factor authentication that uses username, password, and radius. So here is the assignments table for my demo Active Directory domain. And the way this reads is it basically says, based on who the user is, and our default is to use the member of attribute, but based on who they are and where they come in from, that combination determines if they need to pass their MFA. And then if all that passes, it gives them their role and their policy. So essentially what you do is you start defining these rules and you put your most restrictive rule on top and then you go down the list. So here I'm saying, in my case, any group that logs in from an on-prem web browser, they don't require MFA. Now, if someone logs in from an on-prem web browser, they get this user role and policy, and then the broker doesn't evaluate any more of the roles. So that just defines the MFA requirement. If they fall through that row, come in from a different web browser, then it says, okay, now they actually do require, in my case, the Okta radius. So to see that in action, here, now I'm logging in through my Leostream gateway. So again, I'm remote. This is a web browser running locally on my laptop. I'm hitting the Leostream gateway, which is forwarding my login traffic to the connection broker, which is locked inside of my data center, which is my AWS VPC. So the broker notices that my web browser is remote, and so it prompts me for a PIN. Now, what you can't see, as I type this carefully, is that my phone has an Okta Verify app on it, and I just typed in a one-time passcode that was on there. So now I get connected, and I can connect into my machine in there. And this is my DCV connection to my AWS instance, and then I can type in my information here, and I'm logged in. So that's remote. Now, what if I'm actually logging in on-prem? Well, here, I'm actually RDP'd into an instance that's located inside of that same VPC. So you can see the private network up here on the top right. That's the 192.168 network that my location was created out of. So now I'm going to log in from there. And what you notice, I sign in and I go straight in. I didn't require the MFA in this case. Just get rid of that. So that's when using two factors with Active Directory or any other username password and a radius provider such as Okta or Duo. Now let's look at what the SAML looks like. I mentioned that SAML is global, so I had this authentication server disabled, but now I'm going to re-enable it. Now once you enable the SAML IDP, you get that warning saying all login traffic is going through it. And you can see that now if I go to this same address here, instead of going to the broker login page, it's taking me straight to, in my case, Okta, where I can log in using my Okta credentials. That then is going to redirect me back to my offer list. Now, Okta had its own assignments table, so I actually got a different policy because I came in through a different authentication server. So that's just an overview of some of the MFA options that you have with Leostream. If you need more information, you can always contact Leostream at sales@leostream.com.